Hello, and happy April 10th. If you're watching this video the day it comes out, then Sonic the Hedgehog 2 has been in American theaters for 2 days. Neither of us have seen it yet because we've been making this video, but we did see the first one together and we both thoroughly enjoyed it.
Speaking of, that was in fact the last movie that either of us saw before the start of the 2019 pandemic. When the pandemic hit, all trips to the movie theaters halted. But that didn't stop movies from being released. A lot of great movies came out during the pandemic, and we thought it'd be a fun idea to make our first collaborative top 10 list of our favorite pandemic movies.
Now, of course, we do recognize that the pandemic is still ongoing, but it is interesting that the pandemic started with Sonic and has so far ended with Sonic. So we're using the two Sonic movies as our cutoff points. All the movies we're about to mention were released between February 14th, 2020 and April 8th, 2022. Also, just for clarification and to keep things regulated, we will not be including either Sonic movie in the list itself. And with that, it's time for
Number 10.
A follow-up to the 2017's Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile is a murder mystery movie based on the Agatha Christie novels of the same name. Directed and starring Kenneth Branagh, this movie was actually completely finished and ready to be released when the pandemic hit, and got delayed until a few months ago. Investigative detective Hercule Poirot finds himself on yet another mode of transportation filled to the breaking point with A-list celebrities, the most famous of which gets murdered in the first act. For a movie that's so formulaic in its setup, the execution is what pushes it over the top. Kenneth Branagh delivers another outstanding performance as Hercule Poirot, one that had us on the edge of our seats. To quote Thunder from 2 weeks ago, a good mystery movie should have you on the edge of your seat looking forward to what's going to happen next and trying to figure out the answer to the overall mystery. Now, if only we could figure out the mystery as to why Gal Gadot refuses to do an accent other than her own.
Number 9.
There are a lot of time travel movies, all with their own messages to present and with their own methods of how time travel could actually work. With everyone taking the concept of time travel out on a spin nowadays, it's refreshing to find a movie that not only managed to be entertaining, but also deliver a somewhat unique take on time travel. The Anim Project stars Ryan Reynolds and a bunch of other Marvel alums, and also released exclusively on Netflix after being in development hell for over 10 years, with Tom Cruise originally cast to play the lead. This movie takes time travel movie tropes and tips them on their head. In doing so, it manages to be both predictable and unpredictable in the process, while still being entertaining. If you don't know who's in this video the first time you watch it, it can lead to a lot of cool moments. Ryan Reynolds steals the show in Act 1, Zoe Saldana steals the show in Act 2, and Mark Ruffalo steals it in Act 3, with Walker Scobell delivering the perfect little kid version of Ryan Reynolds in his debut performance.
Number 8.
I think both I and Thunder would agree that the David Ayer-directed Suicide Squad movie that released in 2016 is not only one of the worst superhero movies of all time, but one of the worst films that either of us had ever seen, for a fleet of reasons that we're not going to get into right now. But I think it's important to emphasize just how horrible that movie is because now we're going to talk about its sequel. The Suicide Squad hit HBO Max in 2021 with a new director, James Gunn, and some returning cast members, and what a difference a director can make. This movie has all the action, comedy, outstanding casting, and incredible character development that we've come to expect from James Gunn with movies like Super or Guardians of the Galaxy. And the characters in this movie actually look and act like they do in the comics. One of this movie's biggest improvements over its predecessor. Even Rick Flag, who just sort of ends up in a yellow t-shirt and gun holster by the end of the third act, that's his comic-accurate outfit. No one's quite sure what's next for the Suicide Squad beyond that Peacemaker TV show, but let's hope it's like this.
We fail the mission, you die.
If we find out any information you give us is false, you die.
If we find out you have personalized license plates, you die.
What? No.
If you mismatch blacks, you die.
No.
If you cough without covering your mouth.
Harley, those last three aren't things. Although, probably don't need to say this, but that isn't an open invitation for you to cough without covering your mouth.
And not like this.
Seriously, what the hell's wrong with you people?
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
Number 7.
The most recent outing for Disney and Pixar is Turning Red, a movie that manages to be literally and metaphorically about the same concept, the fear and hesitancy of growing up and becoming a woman. 13-year-old Mei Lee has one thing on her mind, attending a four-town concert with her three best friends, something that she claims will help her, quote, become a woman. The only problem is, she quickly finds out that all women in her family turn into a giant red panda when they reach a certain age, a blatant allegory for getting your period. This movie has a lot to say about the concept of becoming an adult on your own terms and how that's not always an option, especially for women. This movie also gets away with a lot that past Pixar movies couldn't, which is a good thing. This is a movie about maturing, and it has mature concepts and themes in it, and it deserves to be told exactly how the creator intended. It just so happens that exactly how the creator intended is an anime-inspired, Chinese mythology-inspired period piece set in 2002 and filled with time period-specific references.
Number 6.
No one asked for a Foo Fighters horror comedy movie, but that's exactly what Studio 666 is. This movie was written by Dave Grohl, starred all the members of the Foo Fighters, and is inspired by an experience that actually happened to them. The Foo Fighters making their own film puts them on a level of prestige that few rock bands have actually accomplished. Most notably, the Beatles and Elvis Presley. Leaning towards the comedic side with most of the horror aspects allocated to jump scares, this movie manages to have a great balance of horror and comedy, not relying on one over the other. I would go on record saying this film has my favorite jump scare I've ever seen. This movie also marks the second and final acting role for the Foo Fighters drummer Taylor Hawkins, who suddenly, tragically, and unexpectedly passed away at the age of 50 last month. Thank you, Taylor, for 25 years of outstanding music. Thank you for Studio 666, and may you rest in peace.
Number 5.
While Turning Red drew clear inspiration from popular anime, Onward draws very clear inspiration from the preeminent tabletop RPG Dungeons & Dragons, a game that both of us got into a couple years before this movie was released. Again, this movie wears its inspiration on its sleeve, but that isn't a bad thing. If I was a child and I saw this movie and someone told me that's what D&D is like, I'd be instantly hooked. This movie has everything that a classic children's adventure movie should have, but manages to put a D&D spin on it, while also being set in the modern age. It's a world that doesn't sound like it would work on paper, but it actually manages to make its high concept setting feel cohesive and justified, especially when you find out that this isn't how it always was. It used to be a much more traditional high fantasy setting, playing on tropes of both classic children adventure movies and your typical session of a tabletop RPG. We're not going to spoil the ending, but the final boss of the movie is the coolest part and well worth the price of admission. If you're a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, definitely don't miss this one.
Number 4.
While technically not a movie, and technically not released during the pandemic, we would like to personally thank the powers that be for allowing Hamilton onto Disney+. We both know exactly 0 people who have seen Hamilton live, as tickets are super hard to get and very expensive at that. And after seeing it for ourselves through the advent of this made-for-streaming recording of the original Broadway production, we have to say it's definitely better when you can actually see what's going on rather than just listening to the soundtrack like most of us were stuck doing for a couple of years. And what hasn't been said about Hamilton at this point? It's a musical about a historical figure most of us know frighteningly little about, and it's told in the style of rap and R&B music with an almost entirely non-white cast. If it doesn't interest you, fair enough, but we advise you to see it for yourself before casting judgment. It's sort of one of those movies you just have to experience and form your own opinions. And if you're anything like us, you'll probably want to experience it again the very next day.
Number 3.
Soul is fun. Soul is sad. Soul is hilarious, and Soul is moving. Soul gets you thinking, and Soul gets you moving. The first Pixar movie to be released amid the pandemic, Soul is a lot of things, and on the top of that list, Soul is an exceptional movie. Lighting and myself really connected with this movie on a personal level. We're both musicians, and this film is about a musician failing to make an impact on the world. And when the character dies partway through the movie and starts to wonder if he actually lived a fulfilling life and felt as though his time wasn't up and he still had more to offer the world, I think that's something we can all relate to. If I died right now, have I accomplished everything I could have? Did I leave an impact on the world? Could I have done anything differently? Would I do anything differently with a second chance? Throw in a soundtrack comprised entirely of actual soul music and an incredible voice cast, and that's what you have with Soul.
Number 2.
This movie really took us by surprise. Neither of us had ever read a ShangChi comic. Neither of us knew his powers, or his backstory, or any of his supporting characters or villains. And neither of us were particularly hyped for this movie. We make an effort to see all the latest Marvel movies in theaters together, so we did that. And after we had sat through what felt like a full hour and a half of trailers, we were met with ShangChi and the Legend of 10 Rings. The Marvel Cinematic Universe's content comes in all shapes and sizes nowadays, and ShangChi is Marvel's first attempt at a martial arts movie. This movie has everything: an engaging story, interesting characters that feel like they belong in the overall MCU, realistic and convincing CGI, and a killer soundtrack, and absolutely no right being this good. We can't wait to see what comes next for Shang-Chi, and we're definitely looking forward to him using his rings in the next Endgame-style fight scene.
Number 1.
A movie 20 years in the making. Spider-Man No Way Home is what happens when the Marvel-Sony Spider-Man arrangement works as intended. The third installment in the Tom Holland-led Spider-Man movies pulled out every imaginable stop. J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, the return of most villains from past Spider-Man films, Tom Hardy as Venom, and Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield reprising their roles as 2002 and 2012 Peter Parker, respectively. Throw in Doctor Strange and a Daredevil cameo for flavor, and you have what might be the best Spider-Man movie ever. The MCU moved incredibly slow during the pandemic, but when it finally picked up, boy did it deliver. Hey, so just some honorable mentions before we close out the video. First off is Luca, another incredible Pixar film, but one that wasn't as good as the ones that made the list. Godzilla vs. Kong had a lot of great moments and cool action, but not much else. Congratulations to HBO for making an actually good video game movie with Mortal Kombat. Shout out to this scene from The Kingsman, well done. And honestly, just shout out to Yelena Belova, put her in more stuff.
I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. I don't have any weapons on me. Okay, I take that back. I don't have any weapons currently in my hands. That's a lie also.
Thank you for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe.
Our channel has daily uploads from podcast video essays, Let's Plays to skits.
Be sure to watch on Twitch. We stream all our video game and podcast content live at 5 EST every Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday.
Our intro is by Brad Kendrick and music by Froggy and the Friendship. Link to all that in the description below.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.